ideas. And he argues for a nominalist position in opposition to John Locke's conceptualist position. Now, his point is that language gets thoroughly abused. We tend to think that wherever there is a general term, there must be some real object corresponding to it. We tend to assume that all nouns and names, they name things. So if there are general nouns, they must name general things. And if there are no real, objectively real universals, what do general nouns, common nouns name? They name abstract general ideas. The conceptualists' abstract ideas. But that, Berkeley's convinced, is a mistake. Language can do many other things besides naming. Not all words name, you see. Not all language is referential, pointing, signifying, denoting. Many other things that we can do with language. There isn't necessarily any one-to-one correlation between words and ideas, like Locke had thought there was. Words often have no fixed meaning in any case. But in addition to referring to things, words can be used to comfort, to encourage, to exhort, to blame, all sorts of things we do with language. Now, when you read that section in Berkeley, you may think it sounds very much like Wittgenstein, if you've run across into the 20th century Wittgenstein, or the Oxford Ordinary Language Philosophy, as it was called in the 1950s and the 1960s. Because there were a group of philosophers then, of whom Wittgenstein was a very significant one. There was a group of philosophers at Oxford, Cambridge, other places, who were applying to the positivism of the 1930s and 40s, that insisted that all language must have reference, signify, who said there are all sorts of other things we do with language, and Wittgenstein called them other language games. You see, other language games. Sure. We do all sorts of social activities using language. You see. Yeah. It has all sorts of functions. Well, Berkeley recognizes that. And so he thinks that we've been misled in supposing that all words must refer to something out there, and consequently that general terms must be names for abstract general ideas. No. And some of the examples and arguments that he gives are helpful, I think. He says, for instance, that according to Locke, we have an abstract idea of motion, or an abstract idea of color, or an abstract idea of extension. Now take the notion of extension, because that means primary qualities. Size, shape, density, and so forth. These are properties which put together amount to what we call spatial extension, spatial occupancy. spatial extension. You see. Well, do you have an idea of spatial extension in general? Berkeley asks. No, you have idea of a particular shape, a particular size, a particular area that is occupied. But extension? What about color? That's secondary qualities. Color. Do you have an abstract idea of color in general? Oh no, you have an idea of the shade of blue that my shirt has. I was careful to put a blue shirt on today. The shade of blue my tie has. The shade of blue my eyes have. And so on and so forth. But do you have an idea of blue in general? No, the word is simply a catch-all for all of these shades and hues, classified in certain ways. So he denies then that there are such things as abstract ideas. Now, bring it home to roost. Do you have an idea of matter? Abstract? Well, even Locke didn't. He said it's something I know not what. Oh, that comes home to roost. No, you don't have an idea of matter. You have an idea of a particular apple, a particular tree, a particular rock, a particular chair, but not matter in the abstract. Do you have an idea of space in the abstract? No, of certain spatial relationships, of distances, of areas occupied, in particular, but not in the abstract. Do you have an abstract idea of time? Same problem. Do you have an abstract idea of power? Remember, Locke had a long section about that. Oh no, you have a general term, power, that refers to certain felt, experienced forces, but not power in the abstract. You can feel the tension in your muscles as you lift a heavy, heavy weight. You feel the force, the power. But that's particular, it's not an abstract idea. So he denies that there are abstract ideas, and there are times when his rhetoric on the subject is very persuasive. When, for instance, he says this: whether others have this wonderful faculty of abstracting their ideas, they best can tell. But for myself, I find I have a faculty of imagining, of representing to myself the ideas of particular things I've perceived, and of compounding and dividing them. I can imagine a man with two heads, or the upper parts of a man joined to the body of a horse, a fairy giraffe with butterfly wings. I can consider the hand, the eye, the nose, each by itself, separated from the rest of the body. But it must have some particular shape and color. I cannot by any effort of thought conceive the abstract idea described. It's equally impossible for me to form the abstract idea of motion distinct from the body that's moving, neither swift nor slow, curvilinear nor rectilinear and the like. To be plain, I own myself unable to abstract in one sense as when I consider some particular parts or qualities separated from others, etc., but I deny that I can abstract those qualities and frame a general notion by abstraction. And then he goes on to talk of a certain distinguished philosopher who thought you could, and proceeds to disagree specifically with paragraphs that he cites. So in effect, Berkeley is saying, whether you guys can do it, I don't know, you'll have to say, but I certainly can't. I can't think abstractly about abstract general ideas. Now, what sort of an argument is that? You see? It's an empirical argument. He's telling Locke, of all people, that he's not sufficiently empirical. You see? He's telling Locke that he's not sufficiently empirical on this matter of abstract ideas. Yeah. And I suppose if Locke wants to reply, if Locke, the empiricist, wants to reply, the only response he can give is an empirical response. What is there in our experience of using general terms which relates to thinking abstract ideas? Thinking abstract ideas. Well, I put the question that way, so I suppose I should pause and suggest how you might try to answer it, how others try to answer it. You have to think of words not as names, but as symbols. Not as names that point to objects, but as symbols which build into a whole language where symbols relate to other symbols. So when you think abstractly, what you think is in terms of a language. And within the framework of that language, thinking that language, you are thinking in abstraction from particular objects. You think? It's the way it is in mathematics. Square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. Now, don't try to picture that. It won't be accurate. You're not thinking about a particular. You've got to think in the language of mathematics. So I think the point is that it's language seen as symbol rather than a denotating device, a denoting device. Language seen as a system of symbols, which is the vehicle for abstraction. Well, that's something which, of course, gets going in the 19th century. And it's the kind of idea that has been picked up in all sorts of literary theory, so on. All right, any questions, comments about Berkeley's nominalism then?
How does the bishop speak of justice and laws and ethics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd rather hold that until we get to his replies to objections. But two things, perhaps. One, he doesn't write a treatise on ethics. But you say he was a bishop. Well, bishops don't always write treatises on ethics, they preach. So perhaps the question is, how did he preach? How did he counsel? How does a nominalist do ethics? You see, that's the question, isn't it? Okay. Well, go back to William of Ockham. What did he do about ethics? Go back to Thomas Hobbes. What did he do about ethics?